Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. After plenty of urging by the US President, NATO is meeting to agree significant increases in defence spending. But will it be enough to keep Donald Trump happy and the United States a NATO member? Potentially the most significant NATO meeting since the Cold War is taking place in The Hague. Top of the agenda, and Donald Trump's wish list, if I'm being honest, a pretty consequential increase in defence spending. Now, the President has made no secret that he wants Europe to do more, and not just in terms of expenditure. With some justification, he thinks Europe should be defending itself. But is it even close to being enough? Long gone are the days when we could bet the bank on the Americans riding to our rescue if the worst were to happen. And that is what we're planning for. The UK's National Security Strategy was coincidentally published today. It says we need to actively prepare for war on British soil. The first time we've had to do that in many, many years. And with Trump less focused on Europe, there can't be many attending the summit who haven't asked themselves, what actually is NATO without the United States? Just a warning before we get started, there is some bad language ahead, so you might not want little ears listening to today's episode. Deborah Haynes is, of course, our Defence and Security Editor. Deborah, good to see you. Joining us, of course, from The Hague in the Netherlands, where this NATO summit is taking place. Look, just remind us, what was the point of this NATO summit?
The key thing on people's minds here is Donald Trump, America, American commitment to NATO, the threat they see posed by Russia, and the need for the Europeans to sort their own security out and commit more to spending on defence, not just to please Donald Trump, because he's demanding that, but also, of course, to rebuild defences after decades of underinvestment.
So this will be the summit where there is agreement to dramatically increase defence spending across the board then?
Well, yes, on paper, that is what's being agreed. And actually, as someone who's covered these summits for a long time, the number you're talking about, 5% of GDP to be spent on defence, security and resilience, is a pretty extraordinary number, given that back in 2014, the Allies were agonising over whether they could manage to eke up defence spending to a feeble 2% of GDP. But then when you dig into the details, it suddenly becomes a lot less impressive. So the time frame they've given themselves for this is 10 years. And given that some alliance members are warning that Vladimir Putin might test Article 5, test a NATO country within the next 3 to 5 years, it would seem a bit delayed. And then actually the granularity of the detail of what composes this 5% also has plenty of capacity for fudge. I know numbers are really dull, but it's important here. That 5% is made up of 3.5% of core defence spending, which is really the most comparable number to the previous target of 2%. And that is significant, and that's going to be hard for the UK, because that will mean significant increase in spending that Sir Keir Starmer has yet to commit to. So there's a bit of concern about smoke and mirrors.
This NATO summit is surely one of the most consequential that there has ever been. And yet it is somewhat overshadowed, of course, by those US strikes on Iran. I mean, Donald Trump isn't even at the NATO summit just yet, but he's already been speaking. And of course, he's not been speaking about the NATO summit. He's been speaking about that conflict that he announced that he had brought to an end. Yeah,
he has. And he's been using pretty blunt language. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say it on your podcast.
I'm not happy with Israel. When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
It's Donald Trump that we're talking about, and he is not a conventional world leader. And everyone was very surprised, impressed that he had been able to achieve the seemingly impossible in securing a ceasefire only 12 days after Israel started bombing Iran. And then suddenly out of nowhere, Donald Trump saying that both sides had agreed to a ceasefire. That did seem absolutely remarkable if that had held. But of course it didn't hold. Both sides launched attacks against each other. And now we're seeing Donald Trump's frustration playing out in the way he knows best on social media.
Yeah, his frustrations perhaps linked to his Scottish ancestry, the use of language there, something very reminiscent, I would say, of of my fellow countrymen. But let's try and bring this back to NATO, to those numbers. Even if we see this increased spending, can NATO's European members look after themselves without the United States, really?
Right now, no. The United States, it's got a big, powerful Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, compared to each European NATO ally. But if it enables the battle space, it has the satellites, it has the intelligence feeds, it has the technology to be able to create a huge picture of the battlefield. For example, the UK military relies very heavily on American satellite feeds, intelligence feeds, to be able to find targets and then lock on their missiles and then fire at them. So if you take that away, it becomes suddenly the capability of European militaries becomes a lot less.
So is this all enough to appease Donald Trump? I mean, this is his first NATO summit since re-election. Do we really yet know what his ultimate plans are when it comes to United States involvement in Europe, United States involvement in NATO more generally?
Well, his defence secretary, when he came to NATO headquarters in Brussels in February, he dropped a proverbial bombshell when he basically said that it's kind of up to Europe to do much more to defend themselves, because America, as Donald Trump has made clear, is shifting its focus to the Asia-Pacific to concentrate on what it sees as its primary threat and challenge, and that is the emerging dominance of China as a global power. And they will be presenting this new target, this new spending target, as a huge win for Donald Trump. But part of me wonders whether I just don't think it will be enough. I think that for Donald Trump, yeah, of course, being a member of the alliance, it's useful. It's important to have allies, but everyone is anticipating that the US presence will reduce and the Europeans will have to do more. There are sort of scaremongers that talk about Donald Trump withdrawing the United States completely from NATO. I don't think that is on the cards at the moment, but it's certainly the case that the Europeans are not only going to have to sound as though they're doing more, they're going to actually physically have to do more, because the Americans are serious when they say they're going to do less.
Yeah, and surely it doesn't bode well that the US presence at the NATO summit itself is pretty minimal. He's only attending for one night, and he only seems to be staying overnight because he's getting a free night's accommodation at the Dutch Royal Palace. I mean, how involved is Donald Trump really going to be at this NATO summit now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it is pretty extraordinary, the steps that have been taken to choreograph the summit to make it Trump-proof. There were real concerns that you'd have a rerun of what happened with the G7 just a few days ago when Donald Trump left early because of the escalating crisis in the Middle East. And so the actual programme itself has been shortened. Donald Trump has already decided to arrive late, so he won't be here until the evening. There's going to be a sort of a social dinner with all the allies. Like you say, he's going to be spending time with the Dutch royal family, and then tomorrow the main business session will happen in the morning. There's always a communique. It's usually fairly chunky in the paragraphs. This communique is going to be much shorter, brief, blunt, straight to the point. Talk about NATO spending targets. There'll be a mention of Ukraine. There will, of course, be a mention of China. The allies realise it's important to make sure that they demonstrate their utility as a unified force to support the US in its efforts to stand up to what America sees as Chinese threats. But yes, this is the Donald Trump show, not the NATO-only show.
Yeah, I mean, that calculation on the part of the White House that China is the foe and Russia is not, I mean, doesn't make much sense to many people in Europe. It certainly doesn't make any sense to Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, who's just been sitting down with our colleague, Mark Austin. I mean, President Zelensky is not alone in this view, but he says it quite explicitly. 5 years from now, we could be seeing Russia taking on a European NATO state. I mean, he's got a point, doesn't he?
He does, and I was interviewing the Lithuanian defence minister just a few minutes ago, and he was sort of talking about how NATO weakness from the Allies' perspective, is an opportunity for Moscow. And so that is why they're saying, so the Baltic states, the countries that have shared history with Russia and a shared concern about the threat that Russia poses on their immediate borders, they are rapidly increasing defence spending at a much faster rate than the majority of the Allies. And the problem with NATO, it's a strength and a weakness, is that all allies have to agree before NATO can do anything. And so that is why you've had this 10-year time frame to achieve this defence spending goal of 5%, which many regard as so long, so far in the distance, it's meaningless, but it's clearly the best time frame they could get everybody to agree to. And even with that, Spain has made very clear that they are agreeing to the time frame, but they absolutely do not intend to meet it. And again, surely that will create a point of friction at the summit.
Deborah, on a not unrelated topic to what's going on in The Hague, your podcast, The War Game, fantastic stuff. The 5th and final episode is out today. I've listened, I've enjoyed every bit of it. But just briefly, for those who haven't, just remind us what it's all about.
Oh, well, thank you so much for mentioning The War Game. Yeah, so what we've done is we've simulated an armed attack by Russia on the UK to test Britain's defences, which, as governments have said repeatedly now, have been hollowed out since the end of the Cold War. And would they be able to cope? Would the UK come under armed attack? And as well, most pertinently for where I am at the moment, it's about testing Article 5. We're always told that the NATO founding principle of Article 5, that an attack on one is an attack on all allies. What would that actually mean in practice? And if you look into the details, they have to agree to invoke Article 5. And unless all allies agree, it can't be invoked. And then even if it is invoked, each individual ally can choose how they respond, and that can be from warm words to weapons. And so it has deterred threats for more than 75 years now. Were it to be put to the test, though, were a hostile state to sense weakness, how would the allies respond? And that is tested in the podcast series.
It certainly is. And the cast list that you have brought in for this is fantastic. You know, former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, Amber Rudd, former Home Secretary in there. So these are politicians who know what they're talking about. But I'll confess this, Deborah, any number of chills went up my spine over the course of listening to The War Game. But the point that I kept returning to is directly pertinent to what we've been discussing about the United States, about NATO. And that is, if the United States isn't in the United Kingdom's corner, our defences are pretty minimal.
Yeah, it's really it's designed. It's not designed to be alarming. It's designed to spell out the reality, not just the reality of the threat, but the reality of our own capabilities. And it does really pose a question. If you want to fix this, then governments and the public, they have to make a choice. And you're hearing, the Prime Minister, the real Prime Minister in the real world, he's published a big defence review. He's talking here at NATO about this new 5% defence spending pledge. But unless that actually is translated into not just increased hard military power and capacity to endure in a high-intensity war, but also a more resilient society that is more familiar with the idea of a whole-of-nation effort to deter a threat or respond in the event of an attack, then experts do say that we are increasingly exposed.
Thanks, Deborah. Of course, things have a habit of moving pretty quickly these days, so for the very latest from The Hague, head over to the website skynews.com. That's a lot for today. The Daily's back tomorrow.